Welcome to the Momentum Flow podcast, where ideas, innovations, and experiences are shared to create a continuous stream of inspiration and insight. Join me, your host, Luis Solana, a supply chain expert and investor, as I uncover how visionary founders, operators, and leaders are spotting opportunities, sparking innovation, and scaling profitable growth. From plan to cash, I bring real-world experience and an investor's eye to reveal how clarity, capital, and conviction fuel sustainable growth. Tune in and let's keep the momentum flow going. Today, I'm joined by Chris Kane, president of the American chain of warehouses, co-founder of 3PLRX, and former chief customer strategy officer at Kenny Sable. Chris is a deeply respected voice in the evolution of third-party logistics. With nearly 4 decades of experience, he has led the transformation of this industry from family-owned operations to scale global platforms. And now he sits at the intersection of legacy, innovation, and non-for-profit. What makes this conversation particularly compelling is the dual lenses of understanding how large 3PLs scale and how smaller multi-client providers compete, differentiate, and win. And importantly, how a 115-year-old organization is being reimagined for a digital connected future. Chris, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the Momentum Flow.
Luis, it's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. The pleasure is mine, Chris. So let's start. I'll ask you to please share a bit about your career journey from your early days in Kenny Sable, your then family-owned business, to your current focus as a non-for-profit matchmaker between customers and logistic provider members of ACWI, I should say.
Well, Luis, I've been blessed. I made one of the best decisions in my life when I was 7 years old at 7:30 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And that was whether I watch cartoons like most 7-year-olds or do I go to work with my dad. And I chose to go to work with my dad, and it was the best decision, one of the best decisions in my life. He just fell in love with this crazy business that we're in, and he was the master teacher. He was not only my father, my boss, but really became my best friend. And he taught me very early on, Luis, that, and this was before technology, that it's a people business and it's a business built on trust. And he said, you can buy buildings, you can buy equipment, but the one thing, Chris, you can't buy is trust. And that's earned. And you may not get the business the first time and go around, but someone will never do business with you if they don't trust you. And that's a lesson 40 years later that I still hold today. So we had a great opportunity. A family business that's why I'm back doing what I'm doing now, because the majority of our members at ACWI are family members, and I love family businesses. I worked with my siblings. I had 2 sisters and 5 brothers, and we all created a little niche and role in the business, and we worked very well together. And as the business grew, we brought some professionals into the business, but we had a great run. We're all best friends today, and we just learned a lot. And what I will say, Luis, is the business is so different, today, than when I first entered. I mean, my brothers were, in the distribution centers. They called them warehouses at that time with clipboards. And today, it's handheld technology. So, but it's been a great run, and appreciate the opportunity to kind of share the background.
It's been quite a journey. I love how you refer to clipboards as handheld technology. I think that's pretty suitable. So now, what keeps momentum going all along for you after 40 years? What keeps you with that excitement and energy?
Well, this latest venture is the opportunity to work with my son, Zach. So, he came to me at age 22, not at age 7. I mean, I guess I was a little unique at that point. But he's a really smart guy, Luis. He loves technology, and he was looking, to do something, and he came up with this idea of 3PL RX, and the RX was really a resource exchange. So what he did is he scrubbed the internet and found we were helping a lot of these e-commerce, e-fulfillment companies that are just getting started. Some of them, doing services in a garage or a small building, and we help them with regulatory and compliance, safety, labor, real estate, all the vital things to keep them operating. They were busy shipping boxes and that, and so it was. We knew we weren't going to get rich off of it, but it was a way to help small companies, get started, and that was rewarding for both of us. He handled the technology side. I helped on business development and other areas. And we're just getting that thing going about 6 months. And the American chain approached me and said, they liked what we were doing from a technology standpoint. This is an old 115-year-old organization. Would ever consider merging? And so I talked to my son, and we looked at it and we said, yeah, we really take the best of both. And so to work with him, I mean, people like yourself, I've met some great friends in the industry. My customers are always ended up becoming my friends. And it's a people business. As much technology as there is out there today, it'll always be a people business. And I just love helping, manufacturers, shippers, and retailers when they have a need for warehousing and 3PL services, and then helping, our members that, have space and that can fit that need. I'm a eharmony.com type of guy, I guess, but it's been good.
That's good. That's good. I think that's a great analogy. So let's go back to the genesis, to the foundation, right? So both of us came up as operators, but we have seen things through different lenses over time. So what defines a modern 3PL today versus even just 10 or 15 years ago?
Well, you've got to say it's the technology. I mean, I walk through these buildings today, and I'm just amazed and how they're operating with technology. And I think that any modern 3PL, that's a core operating mode to have that technology. But I love in the different areas that they're able to deploy it in. They're able to deploy it in safety. They're able to deploy it in, labor management systems, engineering, and just KPIs. So technology has taken. I said we had clipboards, and then we had big poster boards, measuring our KPIs, and now that's instant through handhelds, and I just love seeing it. I love seeing how technology's evolved in the industry. It's a great industry.
I think you're referring on the evolution of the 3PLs really becoming not only cost centers, but really strategic lever for the business. So you
Yeah.
want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that, as manufacturers, outsource more of their operations, I think that, 3PLs had to step up to the plate and take it as an opportunity. And labor is your biggest cost in operating, your 3PL services. So as efficient as you can get with that is really what's going to divide, whether you're providing value to your customer or not. And I think technology has just really made that so much easier and affordable because, the large 3PL providers were always able to, step up and invest in technology. The mid-size that I work with, it was challenging, but not today. Technology's become affordable, and it's nice to see that it's deployed just about in every operation that we work with.
So has the definition of value changed for customers, especially in consumer product goods and distribution heavy sectors over time?
It has. I think that you know today with like on time in full and penalties and chargebacks and retailers demands, customers, they don't look at whether it's your 25 cents a pallet cheaper or more expensive. They look at the total supply chain cost. And I think that the demands that they have from retailers just, the bar keeps rising every day. And where 3PLs can separate themselves is that they can deliver a lot of value by meeting the on time and full, keeping the ultimate customer happy, and it's a win-win for all.
I hear you. At the same time, there's always a tension, right? And where do you see the biggest disconnect between how 3PLs position themselves and how customers actually perceive them, right? Because there's obviously not always the value doesn't always come across strongly to the customers.
It's a great question, Luis. And if I could recommend anything to 3PLs is to spend more time listening to your customers. The customers will tell you what they need. So often 3PLs feel that, it's so hard to get with the customer today that you want to take that opportunity and sell our services. But, if you listen to your customers, they'll tell you what they need and just then take that and deploy it in your operations. I think that's going to be, the differentiator for the 3PLs that are going to grow.
I think that's an excellent lead to our next section because not all 3PLs are evolving the same way as you well know. The contrast between large-scale operators and smaller multi-client providers, I would argue that it's becoming even more pronounced.
Yeah.
So, where do large-scale 3PLs truly differentiate today, and where are they vulnerable from your perspective? And I don't want you to bash your friends, but just to get a context of your perspective on that.
No, I think it's a great question because I think what's important is that you stay in your lane. I tell our members, you're not you really shouldn't be out chasing those really big, large contracts that the large 3PL providers have. Your niche is with the multi-client, small, type customers because you can do so much more for them. But if you think about the large contracts, many times the customer is providing the real estate. Sometimes they're even providing the WMS systems. So the 3PL is really just providing labor, which to me was always a commodity business. I think where the smart mid-tier 3PLs, they differentiate themselves with the various services that they do. They truly become an extension of their customer because their customer is a lot smaller. They rely on them for the WMS. They rely on them for providing the space. When they're growing, they're allowing them to grow within the same building or within the same complex that they have, and they rely on them to get it delivered to the customer on time. So I think there's a space in the market for the large 3PLs, and I think they're going to continue to grow. And we had a customer years ago that came to us and said, they wanted to reduce the number of 3PLs to just a few, from at that time, I think they had over 20 and they wanted to take it down to six. And, I understood that, but I think we're the small mid-size. I've got a lot of our members that are working for some larger 3PLs on the specialized
Yeah.
work and work that doesn't fit into the, kind of the large cookie cutter approach that they have with the big operations. So as long as you stay in your lane and know what you can do well, I think there's opportunities for both.
I love how you did that contrast between the large 3PLs and the multi-client 3PLs. Now, the trade-off, how should shipper think about the trade-off between scale that you get with a large 3PL and a specialization, to your point, that you might get with a smaller multi-client 3PL?
And I think that depends on the shipper. The large shipper definitely wants the large scale, 3PL that they can leverage, all the things that I talked about. The smaller mid-size, shipper, they're relying more on the value-added services and all the resources that the smaller mid-size 3PL can bring. So again, I think that if our mid-tier guys stay in their lane, they do what they do well, I think they're going to have growth. You see the large guys just continue to get bigger and bigger. And I think as they do that, some of the smaller type customers that they may have started with sometimes don't fit in as they get bigger, and then there's fallout, and that's an opportunity for our type of customer.
It feels that I wouldn't say advocating, but you're bringing the realization that we're probably moving towards more a portfolio model of 3PL partnerships rather than single provider dominance. And
Yes.
well, okay, I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but that's the way it sounded to me.
No,
Okay. All right.
spot on. Yep.
Perfect. Okay. So that fragmentation you're describing really creates opportunity, but at the same complexity, right? Which brings us directly into the role of ACWI. So you have a remarkable legacy in that organization. At the same time, how are you modernizing that for today's digital supply chain? Because as you know, technology is coming. You mentioned it. So how are you keeping up with that?
So since COVID, there's been a lot of 3PLs that have popped up, especially with e-commerce growing 20, 25% per year. And with that, there's been a lot of matchmakers, digital matchmakers for that need out there in the space. I think what we're trying to do with ACWI is take our 115-year legacy. And, Luis, an organization doesn't last 115 years unless it has a strong foundation. I think I heard a statistic that less than 0.5% of organizations last over 100 years. So what I was blessed with was to come into this organization with a very strong foundation, a foundation really built on trust. What my son is doing is he's digitalizing this, that we're using AI tools to do strategic marketing for our members. So we're finding business opportunities and needs that fit our members. The difference too is, we'll do mass email campaigns, targeted, but email is inexpensive, and then we'll get a handful of responses for that. What I do then is I personally get involved and I filter those, because I learned actually from my dad that, any business deal has to be fair for both or it's not going to last. And what I want to do is I want to match a manufacturer, a shipper, a retailer with one of our members. I want that to be a long-term partnership and relationship. It's expensive when you make the wrong decision with a 3PL. You know that. You've got to, you know,
Guilty as charged.
Exactly. So I think that what's exciting about this is that we have a long legacy, but they're allowing us to bring in the modern, digital technology and use AI tools to position the mid-tier 3PL providers that do phenomenal jobs. They're typically best in class in their markets that they serve, and we're able to help them through sales and marketing efforts. So it's fun.
Okay, no, that's good. At the same time, it's a highly commercial ecosystem, right? The competition between different 3PLs is fierce. So, so the model of ACWI being a non-for-profit, how does it play on the building trust? Does it help? What role? Because you probably have you have a more engraved relation with your members, right? So how does that help your members?
Well, because we're a nonprofit agency, our whole mission is to help the ultimate customer find the right 3PL warehouse company, and help the warehouse company find a customer. So we're not motivated by profits. We're not we run a very low overhead. So I think a customer feels comfortable that they know, hey, their mission is to help me and to help a member as a matchmaker. So I think that the nonprofit status is beneficial.
So I was going to say I assume, but I know that part of the role that you take with the CWI is in that matchmaking is not just matchmaking for the sake of it, but really trying to find the right fit 3PL partner for the different customers. Correct?
Yeah, and that's where I take my close to 40 years experience that when I look at the opportunity, I want it to be a win-win for both, because then I know the small mid-tier 3PL providers, they look for partnerships. It's not contractual, that they're going out for a bid every year or every 3 years. When they partner with a customer, they look very long term, and those customers typically are growing. So our 3PLs are able to grow as their customers grow, as long as they provide the value and keep up with the investments in technology and people and that. So it is very rewarding, Luis, to kind of be able to help both sides, every day.
So for our audience, now put yourself on the shoes of one of your members, right? And one of your ACWI members. How are you expanding my value as a member beyond traditional networking? Because I get the part of the networking, but if you're a member of ACWI, what is the value add that the 3PL gets, the members get?
So it's the multi-channel that we do. I mentioned digital marketing, but we also do social media marketing. I myself am still old school, so I think I met you at a conference. I get out to industry conferences, and I think having the mix of all of those, as long as it's targeted, I think having a multi-channel approach to, business development and marketing works best. And some of our members, rely on us for that, they've got marketing folks that do a great job, but we share leads. We work together. If one member has a customer, has a need in another location, they'll reach out to us and we'll help them with that. Or if we bring on a new client for a customer in one location, we're always looking at where can we help you. So one of our members performing well for a new customer helps us in other markets as they grow. So it's a lot of fun. I enjoy it.
No, I clearly get the role of ACWI. You're really building you have built an ecosystem of trust, but increasingly that ecosystem is powered by technology, right? And you know that, it wouldn't be a conversation with me. We don't talk a little bit about technology, but where you seeing real technology adoption, really competitiveness across 3PL tiers? Because there's that adoption, there's a lot of noise, right, on the space. So where do you see the real technology being adopted by the 3PLs?
Well, again, I'll talk about AI because I think what it's done for the mid-tier 3PLs is it's made it more affordable. Luis, a main system for a large 3PL, it was cost prohibitive a lot of times for the small to mid-tier 3PLs. But agentic AI particularly has changed that. And I think that that's really opened it up. I think that the smart 3PLs are investing in technology that's going to make them better. Again, safety. Safety is always the most important thing that we do in the supply chain industry. There's great tools now with cameras and different technology that you can put on lift trucks that really, take safety to a whole new level. I talked about labor management. That's your biggest cost and run into DC. So there's great tools now that are affordable for the mid-series 3PL to do labor management, transportation management, all the different tools that that technology brings to play. I think from the small to mid-tier, it's now affordable. The ones that invest in that really will position themselves to grow in the future. And they all have. It's exciting to see as I go through our members' facilities.
So you see really the affordability has leveled the playing field
It
to be
has.
able to access. Okay. Now, let's talk automation, data. So that, an AI really, you said is is leveling the playing field, right? Now it's also widening, right? So it's also at the same time is, um, you know, if everybody uses AI solutions, at the end it becomes a commodity. So how do you see that when they're affordable? I'm with you, but still smaller 3PLs, they don't have the capital to be able to invest in technology as much as others. You still see that as a level playing field, or you see um, capital being a constraint for smaller players in the AI world?
No, I think they're more prudent with their capital, Luis. I have a member in Southern California that does a lot of import containers, and they just brought in robotics. And what they said is now they're very aware of their culture and their cult and employees. And they went to all the employees and said, "This is the most least desirable job in the distribution center, unloading these containers. How about we bring technology and robotics to do this? You're not going to lose your job. We're going to move you to another job within the facility, and it's a win-win for both." So I think that's a great application where yeah, that's state-of-the-art technology that the large 3PLs would be using for their operations. But this smaller 3PL, and they're not so small, mid-series, but they took advantage of it, and but did it in a way that it was a win-win because culture. At the end of the day, as I said, it's a people business, and the 3PLs that balance the right, culture, I think, are the ones that are going to win the game.
So let me put you a little bit on the spot, not really, but if you were advising one of your members, one of the mid-sized 3PLs, part of ACWI, where would you advise them to prioritize investment over the next 2 to 3 years? One area.
I think safety. I think there's so much tools out there today, in available to them and affordable that safety for me was we started every day with we talked about safety, and I think it's a dangerous business between trucking and warehousing. So you'll never be wrong to invest in safety, and I think I would recommend that.
I fully agree. I think safety translates, and that's more for the broader audience. Safety in an operation translates beyond just getting people back complete at home every day. It just translates into adherence to processes, productivity. It adds value. So I understand why safety at the forefront. I even would agree that that's a good investment. So let's pivot a little bit. So let me now get you into an area of the conversation where I'll go through a series of questions, just short questions, just trying to get your immediate reactions to this question, right? So let's go through them. So what will separate in the future the top performing 3PLs? Let's say fast forward a decade. What do you think? What will separate the top performing 3PLs? Who will be the winners?
I think the ones that are adaptive to change. I think that you've got this business, as I said, was so different than when I entered, 40 years ago. I mean, it was just announced Amazon is entering the 3PL space.
Yeah,
Who knew that was going to happen? That could be a real game changer. But I think the smart ones that say, okay, that happened. How are we going to adapt to that and get a business plan to go forward and compete with that? I think those are the ones. So I would, see the ones that embrace change and willing to take some risk. There's a lot of risk in this business that you have to do. As long as it's a calculated risk and invest in the right technology and tools, that's what I would recommend.
love it. Embracing change. I agree. Do you believe consolidation will continue or does fragmentation will persist?
I think it will continue. I just found this is an old ad from 1926, and it's American chain of warehouses. And at that time, we were only 15 years old. We had 90 warehouse members, and right now we have one member that's still in business today on that list. And not that they all went out of business, but they were all either consolidated or bought into other things. So consolidation is in any industry is going to happen, but I think in the 3PL space, it's going to continue to happen.
I fully agree. So what capabilities will define future ready in logistics? Which are the key things that the 3PL will have to have right?
I think, if they invest in all the right areas, and believe me, I keep talking about people, but I think if you put as much investment in human capital, and from a dollar standpoint, it's not as much as you invest in technology, but from a time, I think it's so important that 3PLs don't underestimate the value of that, and actually the ROI on that. I mean, I think the big part of what made our business attractive to a global company was the culture that we had, and we had very low turnover, and we had long-term associates that knew the business inside and out. And right now, that U.S. division is the fastest growing division for the 3PL that purchased. So I think there's a testament there. So we invested a lot in people, and I don't think you can do enough of it. And I would encourage the future 3PLs to look at that, to invest more in the future.
You've been very humble about bragging about Kenny Sable. I know the story, and I know the acquirer. I think you that was a success story. Kudos on that. So what about would you give to the next generation 3PL leaders entering this space? Because there's a generational change occurring in a lot of the 3PLs. So what advice can you give them as one of the the voices of experience in this industry?
I think get out of the office. I think get out, visit your customers. And I know how hard that is today, but but make a point to get out and visit your distribution centers. The impact when a leader walks the floor of a DC, really pays dividends. And I think, Walmart, Sam Walton started, the great retailer, and Sam spent times, and even today, John Furner, they get out and they walk the stores and they talk to the associates, and they find so the best ideas in our business always came from the floor up. And today it's so, with technology and, I don't think leaders get out enough. And I would encourage leaders coming in. The other thing is that this new generation, they have to understand that you have to pay your dues, and I think you have to learn the business from the ground up. And the best way to do that is getting out and learning it from people doing it and day in and day out, and make you a better company. So, I definitely would recommend get out of the office, whether it's seeing customers or seeing your facilities, and it will pay dividends.
I fully agree. That brings me back to recently recorded a chapter with a gentleman that you and I know, one CEO of one large company, and he's also a family business, and he has put the effort on just making the next generation just to be in the floor, rotate on the floor, learn the business. So I think I fully echo that. So let me do a final
Just,
question, but
just
let
to,
me.
just to capitalize on that too, and I have a lot of respect for them. The one thing that you've got to watch in a family business is that you don't, bring the next generation in as executives, and they all, everybody feels entitled. And I have a lot of, I saw that interview, and I have a lot of respect for how they're handling that, and it's going to pay dividends for them, and that's why they're successfully. Not a lot of companies make it to the fourth generation, but they're successfully doing that. So I applaud that.
Fully agree. Fully agree. So let me do one more, borrowing from your experience. One last question. So as you think about everything we've discussed, the evolution of 3PLs, the balance between scale and specialization, the role of ecosystems like ACWI, what is the one belief or mindset shift, let's say, that leaders must adopt now to stay in the momentum flow of this industry? The industry is changing. So, what is that one thing that you say, guys, you better do this?
I just think embrace it, Luis. I think that I think you've got to have a business plan that allocates the right capital to the right areas. And we all know that, technology eats up a lot of capital, and rightfully so. But, I also think you have to look at other parts of your business, whether it's, human resources, safety, technology, I just think that I would recommend that they do that. That's what's really going to separate. The business is going to be different as it was when, I started 40 years ago. It's going to be different, 5 years from now, or even, tomorrow. But as long as you embrace that and you've got a team that works together. I mean, the great analogy, I have a lot of respect for Steve Jobs from Apple. And Steve, he looked at the Beatles and he said, hey, individually, they're all great musicians, but together they were the Beatles, and there's no one else like the Beatles. And I think that's a great analogy. I mean, John Lennon, Paul McCartney, Ringo Starr, George Harrison, they're all great musicians, and they all, after they broke up, they went off and did okay. But boy, when they were together, there was no one better than the Beatles. And so I think have a team that's all working together really will take you to the next level.
I love ending the conversation on team. This has been a deeply insightful conversation, Chris. Really what stood out for me is that the future 3PLs won't really be defined only by size, but by clarity of the role within a broader ecosystem, right? So the winners will be those who understand where they create unique value and who they need to partner with to deliver that value. And so thanks for sharing your insights, your experience, your perspective on where the industry is headed. Any final remarks from you?
No, it is all about creating value for the customer, and that's getting harder and harder every day. So it was a great opportunity to share. I have a lot of respect for you, and I know your background, and you just doing this helps our industry, and that's what it's all about. So thank you, Luis.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. So to our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with fellow operators, innovators, and leaders across the supply chain ecosystem. I'm Luis Solana, and this is the Momentum Flow, where capital clarity and conviction keep supply chains and leaders moving forward. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep the momentum flowing. Thank you all.